Hello, Mr. Allman here, and this is your Allman Cast on plant reproduction. Reproduction is the process by which new offspring are going to be created from a parent. This is the goal of all living things, because offspring are going to share some or all of your genetic information, and passing on of your genes is what drives every living thing to be able to survive and ultimately reproduce. Plants, just like animals and other living things, will utilize two major modes: asexual reproduction, in which a genetically identical clone is going to be produced. Sexual reproduction, on the other hand, is when genetic information from two or more individuals are combined together in the offspring. If you look at this diagram, this is going to illustrate one of the peculiarities of sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction in many ways is going to be much more efficient. Every time a female reproduces, there's going to be two identical offspring, each of which can reproduce to make two more identical offspring, each of which can reproduce. And over successive generations, as you look at the numbers of offspring produced, you're going to have exponential growth of that population. Furthermore, all of the offspring share 100% of the DNA of the parent. Therefore, they are maximizing the number of genes being passed on from parent to offspring. Yet many organisms, plants included, skew more towards sexual reproduction, which in a lot of ways has disadvantages because it requires two individuals. It's more energetically costly in terms of the energy expenditure of courtship and mating. For plants, the process of being able to grow flowers in particular is very energetically taxing. And as a result, there's likely less offspring produced. So if there is such a handicap, why is it that plants and other organisms use sexual reproduction? Well, it's all about diversity. Diversity is going to result when unique combinations of DNA combine together from these two different parents. The more diversity that's present in the genetic information of the offspring, the more responsive they're going to be to the variable nature of the environment. On average, this increase in diversity makes your offspring more fit. And fitness is defined at the rate at which your offspring are going to grow, mature, and reproduce. So even though the process of sexual reproduction does dilute your genes as they combine with another individual's, the end result is that your offspring are more likely to survive. We're going to take a look now, specifically with plants, a brief overview of sexual reproduction and a couple of techniques of asexual reproduction that we're going to utilize in class. You can see a couple examples here. The asexual reproduction that happens in things like aspen trees, where one tree produces clones of itself and does so with great success. The largest, most massive living thing known on Earth is a grove of aspen trees here in the United States. On the other hand, sexual reproduction in plants, particularly flowering plants, really demonstrates a lot of the beauty, a lot of the unique relationships that there are between plants and their animal pollinators, and really exemplifies a lot of really the wonder of natural selection and evolution over time. This diagram is called a cladogram. A cladogram shows over evolutionary history the development of new characteristics that created new branches on the tree of life. Things like vascular tissue and leaves and seeds were all very important in creating these new groups of plants. There are 4 groups of plants that you're going to be learning about later on in this unit: the mosses, the ferns, the conifers, and the angiosperms. And each of those are present here along with some other groups on this tree. This diagram shows the reproductive cycle of a flowering plant. Beginning with the production of a flower, many species of which have both male and female parts. Male parts producing pollen, female parts producing eggs, which after fertilization is going to produce seeds. Seeds are going to be the protective coating that provides both protection and nutrients for the plant embryo inside that is going to be transported to some new place. For many flowering plant species, there is coevolution between a flower and a particular animal species or groups of species that have evolved with it to pollinate that flower and only that flower. So, for example, you can see flies, bats, hummingbirds, bees are all examples of species which have a unique relationship with a particular flower or group of flowering plants, and they benefit from each other because the plants benefit from the action of the pollinators spreading pollen, and the animals benefit from the source of food from the plant. The purpose of fruit in flowering plants is to provide a protective home for those seeds, and a way for those seeds to be able to travel a further distance away from the parent plant. In most cases, these fruits are designed to be eaten by animals, so that those animals in the process of eating the fruits will then carry and disperse those seeds elsewhere in the world. Those seeds, under the right conditions, will germinate, and the process of germination is going to allow that embryo to be able to develop into a new adult plant. In contrast to that multi-step process in flowering plants, cloning for plants is fairly straightforward, and cloning is something that, for research and agricultural purposes, humans are able to speed up extremely rapidly. You can see here this little cluster of plant tissue. Over time, you can see the development of roots and stems from that undifferentiated cluster of cells. The diagram here is going to demonstrate what's going on. You can see, for example, a piece of a carrot. As you look at the cross-section of that carrot root, those cells can literally be put in a blender and separated into individual cells. Those cells are put into a nutrient medium. That nutrient medium is going to supply all the water and the necessary micronutrients that those plant cells need to be able to carry out photosynthesis. Over time, the plant cells divide and differentiate into the parts of a plant that you would expect: the roots, the stem, the leaves. And so each of those individual cells in that nutrient medium, once allowed to be able to develop, can then be planted and produce new adult plants. Each of those adult plants are going to be genetically identical to the parent plant from which they came. That's what the process of cloning does. It produces a genetically identical offspring, one or more, to that original parent. While the diagram is really illustrating the use of cloning for research purposes, you can see from the pictures on the left why it is that this would be useful to a plant. If a plant is eaten, if part of it is destroyed because of a forager, an herbivore coming along and eating part of it, if there is some other type of environmental damage like wind shearing off a branch or a root, then that plant has the ability to take whatever part of it has left and be able to produce the missing parts by regenerating them. Regenerating roots where there were none, regenerating leaves when those leaves were eaten off. This is something that is really helpful to ensure that living tissue isn't just going to die, but instead can actually grow into a new adult plant. In the laboratory, we can speed up this process through a technique called micropropagation. And this is rapid cloning using the similar process to what you saw before for commercial or scientific use. It's going to start here with an adult plant that you want to have cloned. That adult plant might have just the right mix of characteristics for your research, or it might have just the right characteristics for a farmer who wants to produce more of exactly the same plant. Now, if you were to use a traditional method to be able to produce more plants, the process of allowing that plant to sexually reproduce might mix its genes with another set of genes that aren't as desirable, and therefore the resulting seeds that you're going to produce may not have those same set of characteristics. So instead, to be able to produce a lot of clones in a short period of time, you can take a piece of that desirable plant, then establish those cells in a tissue. So again, you would divide those up. You would allow each of those divided cells to be able to produce a new plant called an explant that's going to produce shoots. Each of those shoots has the possibility to be planted and grow into a new plant. But then you can repeat that process. Take a piece of those offshoots, culture them again, and you can see that this can cycle back again and again and again to be able to produce tens, hundreds, thousands of identical copies of that same plant. Once it is that you are ready and you have enough of those tiny individual baby plants, those can be planted. Once they have roots and establish the roots and leaves, they can be removed from their growth medium and planted in the ground or planted in the laboratory to be able to grow into those adult plants. This is something that would be really useful, for example, for someone who is doing any type of testing using plants as a research subject, because genetic variability is going to impact the results of an experiment. So if I wanted to test a particular variable on the growth or fruit production of a plant, I would not want there to be any genetic difference between my plant subjects. So doing a micropropagation would ensure that I had a sufficient number of research subjects that were all genetically identical to each other, and so I could control for that particular variable in my experiment. Similarly, if I was a tomato farmer and I wanted a particular tomato type, I could rapidly produce a lot of identical tomato plants to be able to take to my greenhouse and sell these genetically identical cloned tomatoes to all of my customers, and I would have a lot of confidence in knowing that each of those tomato plants would produce a product that would deliver on what it is that they expected. In summary, plant reproduction may take place sexually, in which two different plants are going to combine genetic information in the production of spores or seeds that will then be able to grow and develop into new plants. However, plants can also clone themselves through a variety of both natural and artificial means to be able to produce genetically identical copies of themselves. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.